Hi, everybody. This is Matthew Saunders. I'm the director of the Lakeland Civic Orchestra. I've been in that job since 2012. And with COVID, we decided it was important for each group to have some kind of master class at Lakeland, each group in the civic music program. So that would be the Lakeland Civic Band, Civic Orchestra, Civic Chorus, Civic Flute Choir, Civic Jazz Orchestra, and Lakeland Jazz Impact. And so we've all been putting these things together virtually, more or less. And I decided the best approach for the orchestra would be a masterclass conversation kind of deal with our new concertmaster, Andrew Smeater. And I'm pleased to welcome him to the chat. Right now, it's just going to be him and I. We may have some orchestra members showing up later, but we've got questions prepared for each other. So I think, Andrew, I'm going to kick it off. Can you tell us what your background is a little bit, and how did you become a violinist?
It's funny. So I think I grew up with this nursery rhyme book when I was a kid, and I remember I think I was like 3, and it was the first time I saw the Cat and the Fiddle. So I didn't know what violin really sounded like. I thought it just looked cool. So asked my parents, take me to some concerts, go see the Cleveland Orchestra, things like that. And before I knew it, I was begging for a violin. 6, I got my first violin for Christmas. Started lessons shortly after. I grew up in Berea, so BW is right down the street from my house. So started taking lessons, going to concerts more often, and I guess the rest is history. Just became obsessed with it.
So 6 is pretty late for violinists sometimes.
I know. I started a little.
Were you a Suzuki student at first?
I was. So I got through books 1 through 5. And then teachers started prescribing me pieces based on what they thought I needed technique-wise. And then afterwards, I did 9 and 10, which are basically just the Mozart violin concertos 4 and 5. And then from there, we just did standard rep. So
great. And tell everybody what you're up to now. What you're working on these days, professionally and musically.
So right now I'm a junior at Case Western, so I'm studying music. There's a great joint program here with the Cleveland Institute of Music. So private lessons, chamber music, theory, they're all taken at CIM, while the musicology department is housed here at Case. So great opportunity for taking history classes, things like that. Right now I'm starting to look at grad schools too, just because next year's my last year of undergrad. So right now I study with Dr. Sims over at CIM. We're working on Isai Sonata number 5, some Bach, D minor, scales, etudes. We just finished Glazunov violin concerto a couple months ago. So been keeping busy. Outside of Lakeland, I play for Cleveland Phil. So obviously with the pandemic, it's been a little weird in terms of concerts or chamber music or really any activity, but just trying to keep busy and get as much experience as I can in Cleveland before I potentially leave in a year. So,
what are your long-term plans with music? What would you like to do after undergrad?
I love orchestral playing. So obviously, if I got an orchestra job, that would be the dream. But I think my bigger passion is teaching. I've always loved working with students of all ages and abilities. I think my approach, at least to music, is you never stop learning. So I think down the road, I'd love to be a college violin professor. First, I got to get my DMA. So I've got about 4 or 5 years of school left, and then hopefully get tenured somewhere. But that's the end goal, is really to just teach at the college level.
Mm-hmm. That's a lofty goal. That's
lots of work.
Thing. All right, I think it's my turn then.
Alrighty, I just got to pull up my questions. All right. Here we go. All right. So my first question was, how did you get into conducting? Because I know everybody kind of starts somewhere different. So I was wondering if there's like a common path into the field, or when did you start getting like the conducting bug?
Sure. I don't know if I ever exactly got the conducting bug. I went to I started piano as a first grader, so I was 6 or 7, 6 probably. And, with the church organist in the small town where we lived. Okay. And did that for many years, changed to a different teacher when we moved to Columbus. And then in fifth grade, the band director came to our classroom and said, here are the instruments. Who wants to be in the band? and I call it Harold Hill Day, and got us all enthusiastic. And the instrument that stood out to me was trombone. And my parents recognized that going to band 2 days a week or whatever it was one way to get started, but to have a private instructor was important too. So they found a college music student to teach me trombone once a week, and from there just kind of built up through middle school and high school. And I don't think I was until I was about a junior in high school that I really realized that what I wanted to do was music with the rest of my life. I had a lot of different interests. Every subject in school was interesting to me. But we had a fantastic music program. We had orchestra and band both at my high school, and I was able to participate in that and in the jazz ensemble. And so I was just getting tons of experience. I also we had a great music program at the church that I attended from third grade on, and a kids choir with 60 kids in it, an incredible music teacher named Dulcie Delcamp, who's just amazing. And, and lots of opportunities that way too. I was, before I knew it, I was playing in church services and, really just getting these ideas. And before long, it kind of occurred to me, well, I'd like to try out composition too. So that, all these directions to go. And the one that sort of made sense when I went to college was music education, because you can do a lot of different things that way. But you also get to have, hopefully a full-time job and not be a starving musician. Although, that's sort of a myth. Musicians don't starve. They work hard and they get done what they need to get done. But, they also have work available to them when they choose to pursue it. So music education in college with an instrumental music emphasis. And because I was a trombone player, they said, band is the direction that you're going, that's where you're headed. And so I took the usual conducting classes and then graduated in 1998 and went and got my first teaching job and taught for 6 years, band and general music and chorus. And at one job I had to teach physical education to middle schoolers. And, did that for quite some time, but always kind of in the back of my head, one day I wanted to go to graduate school. I want to go to graduate school. And so I finally did that in 2004 and went to Ohio State and got a doctorate in music composition. And that's my doctorate. And that's sort of my key to keep teaching college is to get there. But the truth is, if you stick around this field long enough, you end up doing everything eventually. So, one by one, I've kind of ticked those boxes off. And at my first full-time job, I was the band director, my first full-time college job. And, I think part of what got me hired at that job was that I had the high school and middle school experience conducting a group. So it's always been part of my kind of toolkit. And just like at Lakeland, I don't conduct all the time. The Lakeland Civic Orchestra is one part of what I do. And everything else is, what it is. So, did I always want to be a conductor? That's difficult to say. Did I, it's always been part of, my music making since I left college, basically. It's one skill among several that I have. I'm more of a generalist than a specialist, and that's served me well. Hi, Judy.
Hi, finally got here.
All right. Glad you're with us. This is Judy Elias. She's our principal flutist in the Lakeland Civic Orchestra and the director of the Lakeland Civic Flute Chorus. So Andrew and I just got done asking each other each a question. Do you have one for us that you'd like to pose? We're kind of doing a town hall format.
Just as you were explaining what you're doing, I thought to myself, have you ever had a year like this one?
Has anybody ever had a year like this one?
No.
Not since, the 1660s and the Great Plague, right?
Did you ever expect to do anything like this year?
No. I think at least in case we have a lockdown tomorrow, so they just sent out an email today. I think because the cases are going up so much, so
Yeah.
every day is
My kids are
different.
my kids are going to be doing school from home starting on Monday. We've got that coming up. So they did 2 weeks of school from home back in October, and now they're coming back. So, I've had difficult years though in the past. My first year as a public school teacher was not easy, and really had to kind of. I was grateful for every ounce of musical training I had, because learning to be a public school teacher was very difficult. And I had moved away from Ohio. I was in Georgia for that time, and I wasn't sure of where I was, and I was in a difficult relationship. But that's probably been, if I had to pick my toughest year so far, that first year of teaching was extremely difficult, and I learned a lot and came through it. And I've actually written all those things down so my kids can use them someday if I need to. All right, I think it's my turn. Let me pull my list back up here. Andrew, what is your most significant musical experience so far?
So I joined the Cleveland Orchestra Youth Orchestra freshman year of high school. So that was definitely something that, I came into not really knowing what to expect. I was a little 14-year-old. I looked up to the Cleveland Orchestra. I still do. It's just amazing how precise and musical that they are. But I think of that entire experience when we toured China, that was definitely very different for me. I'd never been on an airplane before. It was my first year in the orchestra. So to go halfway across the world, really with 100 other teenagers, and to make music for completely different country, culture, experience, it was pretty amazing. So I think that was definitely very formative for me.
Travel is so important. Everybody should get to see other cultures and do that. A story I always tell in my first year experience classes is about the time that right before 9/11, my brother's married to a German citizen, and we went to Germany, my parents and I, and he, to see, basically to see his in-laws. And I remember when his future mother-in-law got out the baby pictures, and this was the former East Germany. And I remember realizing that, these kids that, we were pointing nuclear weapons at, their baby pictures looked just like ours. We were all babies once. And that if I got nothing else out of that trip, it was a fantastic trip. We went to Leipzig and saw Bach's, hangout, and saw Berlin and Dresden. But, that realization is what has really kind of stuck with me going forward. So the China tour, I can't even imagine. It must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was quite something. I had taken Mandarin in high school, so obviously not fluent, but it was definitely an experience to try to navigate somewhere that I couldn't understand the language either. So it was a great experience.
Did the Chinese audiences, were they enthusiastic and
very enthusiastic? We had an encore that was actually traditional Chinese folk song. So we'd finish the concert and we would sneak that in, and people were like, "Oh, they know that song." So it was great. Lots of standing ovations. People wanting to talk during intermission. Just very cordial, very welcoming. So
wonderful. All right, Andrew, I think you're up.
I think I am. So obviously, I'm still a student. So for somebody who's experienced like yourself, what advice do you have for students who wish to make a career out of music?
Oh, wow.
I think twice about it.
Yeah, I'm going to let Judy answer first while I think of my answer. The things that I'm always telling my students at Lakeland, and it's a cliche. However much you think you need to practice, it's not enough. And this time, these student years are so critical because it's that guided practice, and there is kind of the time in the day, hopefully, to squeeze in lots of practice. and I can think of things that I did back in college that, man, why was I spending my time on that? I should have been in the practice room. But then there's also that balance. I mean, you're making the connection as a student right now with the people who are going to be your colleagues, whether those are your professors or the other people that you encounter when you're out playing a gig, or more importantly, probably the people you are in ensembles with through school right now. So I can tell you as a composer, I've written pieces for a number of people that I went to college with, just because those were the people I knew. My first college teaching job was out in Oklahoma, and I didn't really know anybody there. So it happened to coincide with when everybody my age was starting to get on social media, Facebook in particular, and kind of reconnecting with people gave me the opportunity. Now I've got them as social media contacts where, out of college, I maybe even didn't bother to get their number, which was a mistake. I should have, make sure you keep in touch with the people that you know now and do well. And I had a couple of very close friends that I did, of course, but, I should have been writing down everybody's contact information and staying in touch as much as possible. And it's a personal game as much as it is a skills game. Who you know is at least as important as how well you can play, because there are a lot of great musicians out there, and it's all about the connections. It's all about the connections. And that's one thing. That's one thing in Cleveland. Cleveland is such a great scene for music, and people who start here, sometimes they stay here, but sometimes they go to other places, and people come from other places to here. So it's really kind of this node where, growing up in Columbus, I think there's kind of a Columbus group of people that's centered around Ohio State and Capital University and Otterbein to an extent, some leave and never come back, and some stay in Columbus forever, but very few people come to Columbus and stay there. So it doesn't work quite the same way. Cleveland's a little bit more cosmopolitan than that, and that's a nice addition, but it hasn't been easy because I didn't go to one of the Cleveland schools. Sometimes to break into the world of classical music or the world of music in Cleveland has been tricky. One thing that's helped has been the Cleveland Composers Guild. And knowing the various societies that are out there, the Greater Cleveland Flute Society is another one that has played my music a couple of times. And slowly but surely, I'm starting to pick up on that. Unlike somebody that went to CIM or BW, I don't have that teacher who's established in the community that everybody knows who can sort of vouch for me. So cultivate those relationships as much as you can too.
Slightly related note, did you just have a piece that was played at Ohio Northern, or?
At Ohio Northern, it wasn't my piece. So again, this is a relationship from graduate school. Antoine Clark is the orchestra conductor at Ohio Northern. He's also with the Chicago Sinfonietta as one of their conductors, and teaches clarinet variously and around, and conducts the McConnell Arts Center Chamber in Columbus. And he came to me over the summer and said, yeah, we're putting together these concerts. It's COVID, so I don't know exactly what they're going to look like. But he's trying to diversify his repertoire. Wants to perform more music by African-American composers. And a big name right now is Florence B. Price, who was the first African-American woman to have a symphony performed by a major symphony orchestra. And the forces that Antoine had in Worthington at Mako and in Ada at Ohio Northern, just weren't up to playing her big symphonic works. She has 4 symphonies and I think 2 violin concertos and some other orchestral music. But he found this really nice organ prelude that she wrote called Adoration. And so he said, yeah, take a look at this piece, see what you think. It's in public domain, which is great. So we didn't, he said, I really need 2 arrangements of it. I need an arrangement for Dectet, which is, this particular arrangement was a string quintet plus a woodwind quintet. And he was going to use that with his professional orchestra in Worthington at McConnell Arts Center. And I need an arrangement for the Ohio Northern group, and that's something more like a full orchestra. It's still a small orchestra, no big brass or anything, but it's a possibility. And so we had that performance. They premiered that last week, and then a third orchestra is actually using that chamber arrangement as well. The Northern Ohio Youth Orchestra, and that's run by Colin Holter, who's a member of the Cleveland Composers Guild. So it's all these kind of connections coming together that make things work so much of the time.
Yeah, really small.
But it's been a privilege to arrange those pieces by that piece by Florence Price, and to help music out there that maybe has been overlooked for too long.
Yeah, one of my best friends actually is concertmaster at the orchestra at Ohio Northern, and so I think
okay.
Your name came up in conversation, and we were just like, oh, what a small world. So,
and my relationship with Antoine professionally, is that I've done several kind of these projects for him, including an original composition for orchestra too. So that's it goes both ways, and it's the kind of, again, we weren't especially close in graduate school. Just for whatever reason, he decided that I was the composer he wanted to kind of connect with and work with going forward, and I'm glad. And we talk about conducting, we talk about repertoire that we'd like to program. We pick each other's brains. What are you playing this year? It's one of these relations. Right, Judy, do you have one for us?
No, I wasn't planning anything, but
Okay.
I do find that all very interesting, especially about Florence Price, because I have been hearing a lot of her music lately, especially on Sirius XM. So yeah, this is totally off the subject, but you were asking me about Sirius XM, and it's just a wonderful radio station, the Symphony Hall. I've heard pieces on there that I've never heard before, and I know Bob Brown's and Mary Brown, his wife, have mentioned the same thing. And if you ever get it on your car, and then after a while they'll say, well, the price has changed, all you have to do is contact them, and they'll give you a lower price.
Oh, okay. And we, out in Lake County, we love WCLV, but you get too far into come in. That's and in fact, when I interviewed for the job at Lakeland, the first thing I did when I got to the airport in the rental car was pull up WCLV, and kind of was a little bit dismayed as I drove out to Lake County and it faded.
It wasn't always that way.
Sirius is an option too is a good thing.
Yeah, it wasn't always that way. It's just within, I guess, the last 10 years or so. But yeah, in fact, I think the price I pay is like $20 a month for Sirius XM, and it's certainly worth it because, like I said, they play music that you wouldn't normally hear, and
Right.
by composers, just that for some reason they've been missed. So. Yeah, it's great. But that has nothing to do with what you were talking about. So,
well, and then as I program, and I know some members of the orchestra wish we did more Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, but I think it's important to look for, these pieces that are maybe a little bit more obscure and, sometimes are the right thing for us to play because they're right at our ability level. But also sort of to get people out there. And so, whether that's premiering a new piece or giving a second or third performance to a piece that hasn't had so many performances, I'm grateful for that opportunity. And I guess when you get a composer as a conductor, you're sort of stuck with that. I think of Esa-Pekka Salonen, and for so many years in Los Angeles, and they said he brought the average age of the pieces they played very far forward into the 20th century, instead of, always playing, as one of my conductors once called it, the meat and potatoes.
I do have a question. Did you specifically do the Florence Price piece for Dectet so that it could be performed during COVID, or was that your
Yes.
original intention? Okay.
Yeah, Antoine came up with the instrumentation. He said, "Here's who I've got," and his concert is coming up next week, I think. And he said, "This is what I've got," and it fits with the other things that he's doing on the concert. So he's got a chamber version of one of the Brahms serenades, and I'm trying to remember what else is on there. That's the one that comes to mind. And well, at any rate, right? It's a professional group, so he's paying by the player, in a sense. They're not. It's not a contracted group. He pays everybody per service, so it's a little bit different. And it was an interesting challenge to make two different versions of the same piece. It's the kind of thing you read about in the orchestration book, but and I tried to make them two different versions. The string parts in the larger version are very different from the string parts in the smaller version, and you had more color choices because the larger version, the woodwinds were just flutes and clarinets and bassoons. He didn't have any oboes at Northern this year. So we had some different options that way. Let's get Andrew back in the conversation. What do you do when you're not doing music?
Well, at school, I'm also majoring in finance. I actually just started my master's this year, so if I'm not practicing, I'm probably studying.
As it should be.
Yeah, it keeps me out of trouble. I also really like to cook. So my mom's side's Hungarian, so I call my great grandma or my mom, and she'll send pics of like the old family cookbook, and when I'm bored at school, I'll try to make something. So other than that, go for hikes when I can, especially right now. The fall weather is really beautiful around University Circle, so trying to get outside before it starts snowing.
Right. Something about musicians and cooking. It's a hobby for a lot of us, and of course Rossini retired to become the great chef, and he has recipes in La Rue's Gastronomique. He's named after him. So you're in good company. It's distinguished that way.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite recipe or?
I'm always trying things. I cook for my family, so my kids are kind of picky. I make a pretty mean homemade pizza that everybody likes, and then I'm always sort of trying things too. After we're done with this, I'm going to go set my beans to soak for ham and bean soup.
What time's dinner?
I haven't done in years, so I'm hoping it'll come out. But I had a hankering for it, so we're going to make it.
All right, I think it's my turn, right?
I think it's your turn, Andrew.
All right. So my question is, if you had to pursue a field outside of music, what would it be?
Boy, it depends on which day you ask me. As a kid, I was way into everything to do with space. My parents sent me to space camp when I was in late elementary school, and still, if you look at my Twitter feed, I'm following all kinds of physicists. I got really excited when Chuck Yeager replied to one of my tweets once. That was pretty cool. So there's that. I find that fascinating. I love to take my kids to the Natural History Museum, and we never skip the planetarium.
Yeah.
There's that. Another thing that interests me that I never really heard of until I came to Lakeland is this field of geospatial information science, which is essentially, kind of the 21st century version of cartography. You can be out in the field doing surveying and these kinds of things, but you learn to use satellite data. Mark Guslow, who is my colleague at Lakeland and heads that department, just finished his PhD, and his PhD was a study of the soil qualities in Lake County as they relate to the wine growing and winemaking industry. So, like many parts of the Lake Erie coast, we have this, stretch of wineries that goes out along the lake and this sandy soil that's kind of the former lake shore from, before one of the ice ages. And he's studied that. And that just amazes me. That I love maps. I love, cataloging information and finding that. So yeah, if I had to pick something today, geographic information science would be on the list. I don't really know much about what you actually do or what classes you'd be taking, but it seems fascinating, and seems like that would be a really good career to get going in these days. I could be completely wrong. I know that if anybody's interested, I know, and this will probably come out later than that, but I know next week there is a GIS day that they kind of celebrate that. We do it at Lakeland every year, and I always look for it to come along because it gives me an excuse to think about it. But they put their posters up in the of their projects that that look like conference presentation posters. They put them up in the hallways, and I'll just stand and I can stare at them and get distracted from my work, the things that students come up with. So yeah, those two things, space science in some way or geographic information systems. I also had a pretty serious interest in history as a high schooler, and had some opportunities to pursue that as well, and chose music instead. So history is something I'm always reading about and interested in. Feeds into music sometimes, and I try not to bore the orchestra with too many historical facts when I try to limit myself to one historical anecdote per night for the people that like that stuff, and then everybody else we just keep busy playing. Right. Let's see. I kind of asked. Can you tell us about your approach to the violin, and who are your influences, whether they're teachers you've had or performers that you've seen or heard? What's your? How would you categorize that?
So I guess, growing up, I kind of thought of violin skill-wise in terms of rep, and I think that's the wrong approach. I would practice hours a day, and my goal would be, okay, at the end of the month, I want to be able to play this or play this. And while that was great for, I guess, forming technique, I didn't really think about some of the other important things. I grew up learning Suzuki. I had several teachers teach me Russian technique, Franco-Belgian technique, and so I feel like of all the teachers I've had, I've kind of dipped in a lot of different areas and approaches. I think when I'm practicing, or if I approach a piece with a student, I always try to think it should be easy. So you should be able to approach it practicing with an end goal for the day in mind. Nothing should be tense. You should be able to map out longer phrases, what notes are most important. And if there's technical issues, there's always an etude to go along with it. I mean, Kreutzer, Darn Day, things like that. So I guess once I got out of, flesh scales and etudes and everything that was kind of regimented, my teachers would move on to standard rep. And my approach would be, I'd scope out problem sections and prescribe etudes or whatever was needed. But it's pretty much my approach. I always think you never stop learning, so listen to as many recordings as possible. I think of old violinists, everyone loves Oistrakh and Heifetz. So I do try to listen to a lot of the older players, because I think violin playing has changed a lot over the years, both in terms of technique, but interpretation, especially with Bach. So outside of that, I think modern day players, Hilary Hahn, her technique is perfect. Sayaka
She's such a cool champion of new music too.
Yeah, she is. She really, she's a pioneer for that. I think she even hosted I guess not a competition, but a program a few years ago where she had composers submit pieces and she performed a number of them. So I thought that was really interesting.
I know I have her set of encores. She's commissioned, 20 some encores that are really interesting pieces by fairly unknown composers so far, and to give a boost like that. And, she's one of those players that takes that responsibility seriously.
I think, yeah, definitely. I think aside from her too, there's a violinist from Japan. She grew up in Italy. Her name's Sayaka Shoji. She comes to Cleveland fairly often, but when she does, she plays with City Music, and she'll play newer pieces, or she's had a few recordings where she plays contemporary like versions of the Chaconne or Bach. So I think as long as a person's humble and they have a voice when they play, but they stick to the stylistic elements that the composer intended, I think everyone has something a little bit to offer. So I try to dip as much as I can. Maybe plagiarize some ideas if they sound good, but
Well, we're all plagiarists. That's what music is, right? I mean, that's really cool. I could do that, and then and then you make it your own in some way, and you add your little twist to it. I mean, if we reinvented how to play or how to make music every time we did it, it would be absolute chaos, and you wouldn't be able to appreciate anything because it'd be so individual that it wouldn't have any connection to anything you heard before.
I have a question. Matt, when did you first decide that you wanted to be a composer?
I think I tried it a little bit when I was when I was a beginning piano student, something here or there. But really, as far as really learning about it, it kind of went hand in hand with, learning the repertoire. And around my junior year of high school was when I first really kind of seriously took some steps, to writing something and trying to get it performed and trying to make it good in that sense. It was, and then I was in denial for a long time. It was, I had some good experiences as a composer. I wrote a senior thesis in high school that was a short trombone concerto for strings, and Bill Boggs, who was our orchestra director and was director for many years of Columbus Light Opera, programmed it. Didn't program it, but he gave me a reading, and we got to play through it, and that was a really good experience. But other things, I found it frustrating because I didn't have the taste yet to know if what I was doing was any good. And I was maybe too self-critical, and so and then going to college for as a music educator, as opposed to being a composer. There were all these guys and a few women around who were, the legit composers, right? Who were in the composition program, and I didn't feel like there was room for me to do that. And so I took a few elective lessons in composition, but I really focused on the music education more than anything else. And so it wasn't really until I got out of undergrad and started to play around with that. And I had, I was a band director, so I had these groups that were, these are my groups, these are my captive students. If I want to make them play my piece, I can. And so I started to write for the groups. Sometimes it was arranging for the marching band. Sometimes it was, coming up with new pieces for the band to play, and kind of just gradually shifted into that role. And I sort of decided that I wanted to go teach college and go to graduate school so I could teach college before I really knew what I wanted to do. And I kind of said to myself, well, you've got, I could be a conductor, I could be a trombonist, I could be a composer, and sort of had to sit down and game out, what each of those plans would look like. And I finally realized, composing is what I want to do. And, I had various reasons for maybe not wanting to do the others. But composing was what seemed like it was most likely to lead to, full-time employment, for one thing, and, a sustainable career on the other hand, and what fit with my personality more than anything else.
Well, as a junior or even a senior in high school, as especially as I'm getting older, I notice more and more about composers, and I think, how do you know how to compose for certain instruments? I played a piece by Edith Reed, who just recently passed away, and she wrote a piece for flute and piano, and some of the things that she wrote just were not really good for the flute. She didn't really have a knowledge of the flute. And as a junior in high school or a senior, how would you know about, the different instruments that well that you could compose?
Right, right. And I had read books. I read Samuel Adler's orchestration book, that I picked up on the sale table at a bookstore. It was remaindered. And, I read a couple of theory books that I had gotten at the library book sale at the public library, and was kind of teaching myself very much, and, digging into scores. And this is all pre-internet, of course. And yeah, I mean, some of the first pieces that I wrote were for people I knew, that I had hope of getting performed. And, one person I worked with was a cello player, and she was able to say, look, you can't do this. This is not going to work. And so I take it back and I'd rewrite it. And there's always this tension between what the orchestration book says should work and what will work for, a half a second or so in the actual context, and what you want to actually center a piece around. And that's different for every instrument. There's still, if I started composing in the early 90s, I mean, there are still instruments that I'm a little bit afraid of as a composer, that I'm not completely comfortable with. Harp, for example, this summer, but harp, I used to say, I always avoid writing for harp because, half the time it knocks your piece out of consideration anyway, because the orchestra doesn't have one, or doesn't want to program them that night. But, it's a tricky little big instrument to write for. Guitar was another one that for a long time I didn't feel comfortable with, and I still don't feel comfortable with, but every year the Composers Guild writes pieces for young students, and lo and behold, this year I drew a classical guitarist. And, so I wrote what I thought was a good piece, and his teacher, Robert Greca, over with the Music Settlement, set me straight on a couple of things. But then this 13-year-old kid had to grab it, and he did a fantastic job with it. Really just took it to heart and made it into something. And that's the exciting part of it every time. So there's always something to grow into it. If somebody came and asked me to write a piece for accordion, I'd be in real trouble. Andrew, do you have one more?
Yeah, I got a few.
I passed all my good ones.
Okay. Here, let me look really quick. Okay, I like the last one. So if you had a motto for every day, whether it's in music or I guess you approached anything, what would it be?
The one that pops into my mind, and this doesn't come directly from me, but a collaborator of mine, Diana Anderson, who's she was my piano teacher in undergraduate and is now on the music faculty at Minot State University in North Dakota, and which is very far away from a lot of things, but there's a lot of oil around there. And she has this phrase, and I always remember it. And if I can do it, then it's a good thing. And the phrase is 3 words: keep fighting mediocrity. Try to bring out the best in yourself and the best in others. It's very easy to be middle of the road, middle of the pack. It's easy to get overcommitted to things and have too many things going on and not be able to dedicate everything. But I mean, that's, as musicians and as teachers, that is what we do. We fight against mediocrity. We try to make people better at what they want to be at than they are. We do it by introducing them to, this world and saying, look, here's where you are, right? Here's where you need to be. Well, what can we do to push you up there? And we do it by, fighting that mediocrity, because the tendency to rest on our laurels, the tendency to uh, just be satisfied with something is that's when you stop growing, and that's so yeah, keep fighting mediocrity. That's one of my mottos. All right, it's about the appointed time, and Andrew promised to play something for us to wrap up this masterclass, this little conversation. So I'm going to let him get out the. He started wanting to play the fiddle, but now it's the violin, which we all know is the same instrument, so it's good.
Does that come through clear, or?
I'm hearing it fine on my end.
I'm fine.
Cool. So this is the Allemande from Bach Partita in D minor. So.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So that's Andrew Smeater, concertmaster of the Lakeland Civic Orchestra. We hope to have him in a in-person rehearsal and performance very soon. If the vaccine works out and everything else, we'll hopefully get there. And I'm Dr. Matthew Saunders. I'm the director of the Lakeland Civic Orchestra, and this has been a conversation with the three of us. And Judy Elias has been here too, principal flutist of the Civic Orchestra. So thank you all for watching, and look for us soon in live performance. Before that, we'll have our project for this fall, which has been virtual performances from all of the Lakeland ensembles that we'll be presenting in a video coming up pretty soon. Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care.
See you soon.
Bye.